Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of my series covering the figures from Awaken Realms Nemesis Lockdown. In this episode we're going to be doing a really fast speed painting approach to get through all 8 of these figures as quickly as we can, although we'll be adding some optional finishing touches towards the end. So let's just jump straight over into some priming. Just like the previous episodes, all of the figures have had a zenithal prime, which is just a black, followed by a grey on a 45-degree angle from above, and then a pure white directly from above, as you can see here on this Frosthaven figure. I'll then give every figure a good dry brush, just like I did in all the previous episodes. Then it'll be straight on to all the painting and contrast colours. Just like in the previous episodes, I'll be kicking off with Decayed Metal for the base, and I'm just going to do this in a quick one coat and not worry about the coverage too much. I am going to apologise for the lack of lighting though, as I stupidly had the light in the wrong place, and I didn't actually realise this and move position until a few frames ahead, so you'll just have to bear with me for a moment and I'll try and explain best as we go. I'm also going to coat in a couple of the barrels on their bases with black metal for the shadows and thrash metal for the upper highlights, but you could get away with a single silver here if that's what you so wish. Then a quick wash of the base with 2 parts Nuln Oil and 1 part Agrax Earthshade, and I'll be using some Ratling Grime on the barrels. Again, apologies for the bad lighting, it's not for too much longer, I promise. To create that uniformity with the larvae, I'll return to the Magos Purple, where I'll be using that to base in all of the skin. I'll then use Plaguebearer Flesh to add a mottled effect. So here you can see that I'm very quickly just coating in each appendage at a time, and while that paint is still wet on the figure, I'll come back with the Plaguebearer Flesh and just dab it onto the figure in various places of the highlights, in order to create that nice alien mottled funny looking flesh effect that we all love. I'm going to take some Skeleton Horde in hand and use this to coat in the chest. I'll then wet blend the Magos Purple up against this and carry on painting in all of the skin and repeating that process across all 8 of the figures. Then switching to Volupus Pink to paint in the wing-like skin flaps on their arms and the tendons that are visible on the insides of some of their legs. Oh, and you can see that I also painted the upper half of their heads with the Skeleton Horde. For the remaining black areas on the actual aliens, I'll be using a mix of 4 parts Gryph-Charger Grey to 1 part Black Templar. Repeating each of these steps across all of the figures as we go. Until they're finally all finished and we can begin thinking about coating in the basing, and hooray, we can finally see. First thing I'm going to do is use some pure white to do some edge highlighting on the metal girders. Followed by using our old friend Ratling Grime to coat all the metalwork in. Just be mindful of that cabling. Speaking of the cabling, you can coat that in any colour you like. I think I went for blue and green. I'll use that Warp Lightning Green for the slime on these bases as well. Before finally adding some Gryph-Charger Grey to these rocks. Now you could absolutely call your figures done at this point, or join me now as we apply some finishing touches to build some of those highlights and add some nice object source lighting. The first thing I want to do is to build some more depth in those shadows, so I'm going to reapply some Skeleton Horde to the skull and some of the Volupus Pink to the tendons and the wing flaps. I'm then going to do some optional glazing with some thinned Shyish Purple, although these are sort of marginal gains. This is really more just to try and push the depth on some of those purple areas that I didn't quite get a good enough coverage with in the first coat. Similarly, I'm going to use some Basilicanum Grey to push the shadows on those rocks and on some of that armour plating. Again, this is completely optional. I'm then switching to some pure Ivory in order to dot the eyes in. You can see that I'm using a size 2 brush by Rosemary & Co here, and it's a series 8 that is really brilliant at holding its point. You can find an affiliate link for these in this video description below. I'll also use this Ivory to build some bright highlights on the slime and the rocks, as well as on the tendons and the wing flaps. Now you may wonder what I'm doing here, but there is a method to my madness, trust me. In the meantime, I'm going to start highlighting the skull with Thar Brown by Scale Colour, although something like Ushabti Bone would be just as good here. I'm going to use this to pick out all of the raised edges along the skull. I'll then come back with some pure Ivory, which I'm just going to dot along the eye sockets, around the tip of where the nose would be, and pick out the teeth, and the top of the pointy twin skull bit towards the back. I'll follow that up by using some Fenrisian Grey to edge highlight all of those dark black areas. I'll also return to the Thrash Metal to highlight the barrels. And now to prove that there's a method to my madness, I'm going to be using some Fluorescent Magenta and Fluorescent Green to do a heavy glaze over the highlighted appendages that we did earlier on, and the slime. So here, first of all, I'm dotting in the eyes. And then glazing over those bright highlights to give a really vibrant and saturated feel to those skin flaps. Repeating the same method here with the green over the slime. Then building up some object source lighting over these rocks. And carrying it up the inside of his legs, though you may have to do this in a couple of coats, and just make sure they dry completely before coming back with the next. While we're waiting for that glaze, I'll start to dry brush on some Ryza Rust to get that nice weathered effect. Periodically returning and building that glaze's saturation. Before adding some Nihilakh Oxide to the base for some more weathering. Painting the base in black, and finally giving all the figures a coat in ultramatte varnish. And this completes the Nightstalkers, and quite a foreboding 4-stage look, I hope you agree. We've used some very simple techniques here to try and get some nice bold effects for the tabletop. As always, the full list of all the paints used are now on your screen, and can be found in the video description below. I'd just like to say a quick thank you to you all for your patience and waiting for me to return with this series, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for all the future content. Until next time folks, bye for now.